Hello, 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 everybody. How is it going today? I hope you all are doing well. It is July 8th, 2020, and this is the Ben Burnside Podcast, coming to you from Fresno. Uh, this is the show where I get to talk about whatever I damn well please, and I am happy to be here. Um, we got a packed show today. I'm getting this show done uh, which is it's like a carryover from the show I did a couple days ago, where I meant to talk about this topic today in a large form, but I ended up talking about COVID instead, which I think is kind of funny. But just watch that video. It has me doing like the transition of uh, of of me going from my planned argument to or my planned conversation, I should say, to my unplanned argument. So about COVID-19, and I got more thoughts about COVID-19 and um, how I feel like things should be. How people, how the pandemic, how the handling of the pandemic should be handled by everybody. I got other thoughts on it too that I didn't mention on that video, but because it was kind of impromptu. But I'll mention it in a different video. COVID-19 2, so 192 or something. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But today I get to talk about probably my favorite sport going today, and that is MMA, particularly the UFC, because we got a pay-per-view happening this coming Saturday in Abu Dhabi. And if you didn't notice from the cover of this video, it is happening in an island format. They're calling it Fight Island, UFC 251 Fight Island, taking place in Abu Dhabi. It's happening in an island because of the pandemic. There's not going to be any fans there. Nobody's there except for the hotels, the accommodations of the restaurants, and the media places where they talk, and the arena where they're going to fight. All built by Abu Dhabi. God damn it, those Abu Dhabians making all these accommodations so quickly. The United States does not do that, and we lose business. So God damn it. Anyway, I want to talk about that card, but first off, I want to before that I want to talk about the previous two cards that the UFC has had. The UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, they've had card after card after card through this pandemic. They started around April, I want to say, and or May, one of the 2 months. No, they started in May, but they've gone pretty strongly ever since then, um, without without really having a show canceled or anything. Um, the UFC really seems to be handling the pandemic well. That's not what I thought of at first, though. I thought at first I was really against the UFC for doing the pandemic at one point. I didn't like it, wasn't a fan of it. Uh, I thought Dana White was being a little too aggressive with his shows happening. We didn't know much about the virus at the time, so for him to be so like he didn't really take a step back to do to do any to not do any MMA shows. He really didn't stop at all. He just kept with business as usual, and I really didn't approve of that as a fan, as someone watching. And and it all topped off to me with an interview he did with an MMA reporter named Brett Okamoto, who's a pretty good MMA sports reporter. MMA stands for mixed martial arts. And you know, in that interview, um, Brett was kind of nicely mentioning the concerns of a UFC event happening during a pandemic and what he has to say about all that. He's, Brett's Brett's playing a fine line between asking tough questions to the president of the UFC uh, compared to to being to still keeping it friendly, I guess, and not confrontational. And Dana White, the president, he said something like, you know, this everybody's scared right now, and America needs a leader. He definitely said the last part. America needs a leader, and I was just like, what do you? When he said that, when he said America needs a leader, that meant like he's going to be the leader. He's going to lead America by showing an MMA show from happening. And from that, like I was like, I don't know about that, Dana. I don't know about that because you're are you first off you're saying everybody that's following the rules and staying at home, you're saying they're not leaders. Okay, well, okay, I don't know about that, but okay. Uh, and they're not the leaders. You're the leader. That's number two. So when I thought about that, I was like, okay, I'm done with this. But then he carried on with the event, and I think it was UFC 249. It was UFC 249 in May. That was Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson for an interim title that Tony Ferguson already won, but we'll get to that another point. But that they continued on with this event happening. They did it in Florida, in I believe Jacksonville, Florida. They tried to do it here in California, only a few hours from me in Lemoore, California, I think, in Tachi Palace. They tried to do it in an Indian reservation casino area where they have fights, and they almost did it, but the governor, Gavin Newsom here, he shut it down. He called the Disney execs, who called ESPN, who then called Dana White in the UFC. ESPN owns Dana White. They said, hey, Dana, you got to shut it down. But according to reports, that seems to be what happened. And Dana said, okay, we're not going to do that. We'll figure out something else. So he got Jacksonville, which is the state that proclaims that pro wrestling is essential business. So of course the UFC was going to have an event there, and they had an event. They had apparently it was a good card. I didn't see it. It was Gaethje versus Ferguson, and a good show by all accounts. And from that show, what they really showed was they had an entire detailed system of how the UFC was going to handle COVID-19. They were having people tested immediately once they got there. They were tested like 2 times after that. They were kept in quarantine, all the fighters and the trainers of those fighters for the event, and they did not allow them to really go much of anywhere. And so they stayed put in the hotel, and after that, they went out and fought, and they did what they did their business, and they left. So it was an interesting experiment to watch, for all sports to watch, and it was interesting to hear about, at least from my perspective. What was it? The other sports can't do what the UFC is doing, because like football or baseball or what else? You got basketball. All those sports involve multiple people on a field at once, and it's a lot more bodies to deal with. And the UFC, it's just 2 people in that octagon. Well, they have trainers on the side too, and commentators surrounding the octagon. But all those people are tested, and they're able to be isolated relatively. There's less people to deal with still overall, I think, in an MMA event than in like a football event or a basketball event. That's just the way I see it. That's just how it seems logical to me that it's easier to deal with just from that. And so that's how they dealt with it. And it's interesting. It's interesting to watch that all happen because well, we've never seen anything like that in the pandemic. And they were able to pull it off. Everyone was fine. One fighter was positive, but that wasn't from the event. He came in positive. It sounds like his family members had it, and he tested positive, so he couldn't fight. But the event still went on, and it went well. And since then, they've had like 4 events since then, and it's all run the same way with a very impressive looking operation and process for these fighters to go through. And I gotta say, I changed my tune after a while. I changed my tune as a as as a fan, a guy who was against Dana White big time from those interviews, especially that Brett Okamoto interview, to where he proved, and his organization proved, that they're able to handle COVID-19 well. Like they're the experts in sports of how to handle COVID-19. So I'm pretty impressed with what Dana White and the UFC have done after a while, and how they've managed to prove that they can continue business even during a pandemic, really. And I admire that. I really do. And I think Dana White and the staff of the UFC should be commended by the sports community in general because of what they're doing, and how they're doing it very safely and professionally and ethically. They're all pulling all that stuff off, in my opinion, to where I'm impressed. I'm like, okay, I'll start watching these shows, because I didn't watch these shows. I didn't watch the first event that I mentioned in because of protest. Well, the first 2 or 3 events even because of protest. I was not a fan of how I wasn't a fan of them having a show during a pandemic. But they proved me wrong by how smoothly they're having their operation and how detailed it is. So nobody gets COVID-19 during their shows. Nobody seems to get COVID-19 on their watch. I'm impressed. Nobody seems to be doing that, or nobody seems to be pulling that off very well in terms of having their organization or building, or even outside of sports, like just businesses. Like people within a business or a certain bubble, like a sport, a business, homes, people are getting COVID-19 everywhere. Not on the UFC's dime, so that's pretty cool. So they've earned their prize by getting this card in Fight Island, and it should be an interesting time. I'm sorry if I'm trying to look at the camera, look at this camera, but it's weird. I don't it's just a weird thing to look at this camera. So I'm trying to look at it. I'm trying to be to where I'm trying to talk to a person, but what I'm looking at, it's not a person. So bear with me here. What else? So with that being said, I'll get to that card. Well, let's get to that card right now. I'll get to what I'm going to do is get to that card and go to the 2 cards, which were fight nights. This one's a pay-per-view. The other 2 are fight nights. I'm going to do those after this big fight card, because I think everybody's ready for this fight card. Because this card on Fight Island, they're calling it Fight Island. It's in Abu Dhabi. This card, the whole MMA community has looked forward to for quite a while now. So it's just the idea of Fight Island, in Abu Dhabi. It's just super cool. Dana White announced this idea as the pandemic was happening, and I think people have been buzzing for it ever since. Just an island where trained killers fight each other for championship gold. That's pretty dope. It's like Enter the Dragon shit. So I'm looking forward to it big time. So let's look at the card here. I have it up on Google. Let's see. All right, we'll first I'll go from the bottom of the card to the tippy top. I like to look at all these fighters and how good they are. We'll start at the men's bantamweight division, which is 135. We got Martin Day versus Davy Grant. I don't know much about either of these two fighters, but I think I've heard about Davy Grant though. Let's see, maybe I could get them on SureDog.com, look up their records. Man, this should be interesting. SureDog, Davy Grant. See, Davy Grant's a guy that I've seen fight. I've heard that name in the UFC before. I don't know if he's won, but he definitely had a fight in the UFC. Oh yeah, he's been in the UFC for 7 years. And he's fought a decent amount of guys. He's lost to Chris Holdsworth, Ultimate Fighter finale. He beat Marlon Vera, and Vera is a contender, or he's a rising prospect in that division now. He lost 2 fights after that. Looks like those fights were in featherweight though. He beat Grigory Popov for his last fight in a close fight last November. So he's up and down in terms of a fighter. Yeah, there you go. He's a fighter from England. Makes sense given his name. Martin Day. Let's take a look at Martin Day. Oh, okay. Martin has had a couple fights in the UFC. He won his debut, and this is his second fight, but he hasn't had a fight in the UFC since November of 2018. So could be a little rusty. I don't really know much about either fighter. I'll pick Davy Grant just off experience. I'll pick him. Interesting fight. Next fight, it will be bantamweight as well, but in the women's division at 135. Home of Amanda Nunes, arguably not even arguably. It's like she is for sure the greatest female mixed martial artist of all time. Let's see. For this fight, we got 2 relatively unknowns. Carol Rosa versus Vanessa Mello. Rosa's a bit younger at 25. Rosa's had a few fights in the UFC. This is something else too. I've been trying to save money, so I haven't gotten ESPN Plus lately. So I haven't seen the fights for some of these lower card fighters, which can be a problem as a fan because I don't know which fighters are on a roll and which fighters could be coming up in the the bigger promoted fights down the road. So I'd like to get after it and at least look at these results more. But Rosa has had a decision win. She's had 2 canceled fights, though. But she is now having her second fight. So kind of like Martin Day. She's fighting Vanessa Mello, who I also don't know. She's had a number of fights, though. Well, no, she's only had one more fight than Carol has in the UFC. She fought Irene Aldana, but she lost that in a decision. Irene's fighting for the title, for the Bantamweight Championship down the line, so there's nothing to be ashamed of there. After that, she fought Tracy Cortez, who's 7-1. She lost to her via decision too. You got to figure that this might be all or nothing fight for Mello. Mello has had 2 fights in the UFC, and she lost both of them. Usually how it works, from how I've seen the results, is if you lose the 3rd fight in the UFC, you're out. You got to go back to the minor leagues. Let's see. Oh, I thought I went back too many times, so I lost the page where the card's at. You got next fight will be flyweight. It'll be men at 125 pounds. It's fucking tiny. I decided to volunteer for something at Fresno State one time, and I was with a guy in in a macroeconomics class. It's not my major, but it's like one of those classes I had to fulfill for my major. It was weird, but anyway, it was a general ed class, more like it. But he was around 125 pounds, so we went to this volunteer thing. It might have been a blood drive or something, but they had to weigh us. So we both got on the scale. Or no, they asked us what we think our weight was before we got weighed. And they asked my buddy, and he was like, oh, I weigh like 125, 135 pounds. And they're like, oh, okay. So they wrote that down. I'm not 125 or 135 pounds. I'm more like 225, 230. So I wasn't paying attention, and they were like, oh yeah, and how much do you think you weigh? Just looking at paper. I was just looking at the distance. I was like, oh, 125, 135 pounds. Oh shit. No, I don't weigh that. So yes, I do not weigh that. So this chick that was volunteering there, she just bursted out laughing. It was funny. They have flyweight. You got I'm sorry if I mess up this name. Raulian Paiva, Raulian Paiva from Brazil. It says so on here. 125 pounds, 19-3. He will go against Zalgaz Zumagulov, who sounds like he's a newcomer. There's no picture of him. But Raulian, this is his 2nd fight in the UFC. Earlier this year, he fought in his debut, and he beat a relatively good newcomer in flyweight. I know him. His name is Mark De La Rosa. He knocked him out in the 2nd round. So this should be an interesting fight between this newcomer and Paiva. These Russians, I'm assuming this guy's from Russia. This is a Russian name. Zalgas Zumagulov. These Russian fighters that are coming out of Russia are just elite fighters. So hopefully that's going to be as good as it looks on paper. So I'm looking forward to that. Two hungry fighters that are looking to climb up the rankings. Nobody knows who they are. It should be for a good show. The final early prelim fight. All these fights are going to be on ESPN, so I'm going to watch that. Final early prelim fight is heavyweight, and it's going to be Marcin Tybura versus Maxim Grishin, who is a newcomer. But he is 30-7. He's already had almost 40 fights as an MMA fighter. Tybura, on the other hand, he's been in the UFC. He's had a number of fights in the UFC already, and he's only had 24 fights. So this should be interesting. Marcin, just to give you a look at his career, he has fought a lot of talent. Yeah, they have a lot of fights here. 3 fights in 2016. Oh no, some of these are canceled. Okay, so let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Already had 10 fights in the UFC. First fight, he lost to Timothy Johnson via decision. He knocked out a guy named Victor Pesta. Then he rose up the ranks, knocked out another guy, won a decision against Andrei Arlovsky, who's a legendary veteran in MMA, but lost to Fabricio Verdum, former champion. Got knocked out by Derek Lewis, former challenger for the championship. Nothing to be ashamed of. But he beat Stefan Struve, who's a high name. Let's see, he got knocked out though. Got knocked out twice last year. But he bounced back with a win against Sergey Spivak this past February. So he is Tybura's back. Boy, they're feeding this Grishin to a high-ranking heavyweight already. So this should be interesting. Yeah, interesting fight for the early prelims. Nice little treat there. Now we're going to the preliminary card, the middle portion of the show. These will also be on ESPN. We have Leonardo Santos. This is in the lightweight division, 155 pounds. Leonardo Santos versus another newcomer, Roman Bogatov. Never heard of him, but this Bogatov is undefeated at 10-0. Santos is 17-4-1, respectively. Damn, Santos is 40. He's already 40 years old. That will be interesting. That will be interesting. I wonder if Santos is that guy that I know that's I might have seen him fight. He's like an ultra good kickboxer. So I wonder if this is him. But this will be interesting. I don't know much about either fighter. Obviously, I don't know much about newcomers. But Santos has been in the UFC for a while, since 2013. Won his debut by submission. Then was in a draw, but won his next fight as well. So, then he won 2 more fights. And looks like he was fighting in welterweight for a while. Or no, he was fighting in lightweight. But he beat 2 high names. Wow, he's knocked out a high-ranking lightweight named Kevin Lee by KO a few years ago. Just to let you know, the lightweight division, the division I'm talking about for this fight, it's the toughest division in not just the UFC, but in all of the sport of MMA by far. Maybe in combat sports. This division right here, 155 pounds for men, toughest division. in all of mixed martial arts. So yeah, this is a serious contender. It seems like, or a tough customer. Um, he won another fight against another well-known guy, Adriano Martins, by decision. Now, in 2017, he didn't fight at all. Looks like he got injured or something because he didn't fight in 2018. Came back, though, in 2019 and knocked out Stevie Ray, who's another well-known lightweight. There's a lot of well-known lightweights in lightweight, but they're not even ranked in the top 15. I mean, that's how insane the lightweight division is. And now Leonardo's fighting again. This Leonardo's a relatively successful guy in the UFC, but the problem is he's 40 years old. Like he better start now. Yeah. So he better get rolling, literally and figuratively. So Leonardo, I'll take him for the win here. This will be a tough fight, I bet, for Leonardo, given that he's 40. But this is the first fight this Bogotov's had in the UFC. I'll take Leonardo. Next up will be featherweight. Finally, a name I'm starting to know. Makwan Amirkhani versus a guy I don't know, Danny Henry. Henry's noticeably bigger than Amirkhani already. Same age, no difference there. Featherweight division for men, that's 145 pounds. And the featherweight championship is going to be defended on this show. So, a little nugget there. But before then, we'll talk about this fight. Makwan Amirkhani has been around for a number of years now. Came in at 2015, and he's knocked out. He's had a couple finishes his first year. Then came in 2016, won another decision. 2017, he fought a well-known featherweight named Arnold Allen. Arnold's only had one loss in his entire career, so nothing to be ashamed of. He lost that by decision, his first loss. Then he fought a guy named Jason Knight, who was an exciting fighter when he was in the UFC. But he beat Knight by decision in 2018. UFC in 2019 was a mixer. He had two fights after that. And he beat Chris Fishgold, who's a tough customer. He beat him by decision. Lost to Shane Burgos, who just recently had a very high-profile fight against Josh Emmett. He's like ranked number 6. He beat that fight with Burgos and Emmett. I'll probably talk about later. But that fight is arguably fighter of the year. It's like number 3 for me, but it was a pretty damn good fight. But Burgos knocked out Amirkhani, unfortunately, for Amirkhani. Then you got 2020. This is Amirkhani's first fight. If all goes well, he doesn't get COVID or something. He was supposed to have another fight in London in March, but the COVID-19 shit hit the fan, so he ended up not having a fight. That's when all the COVID-19 chaos started. Yeah, in March. It's crazy. It's almost been 4 months since that. Let's see it here, though. So that should be a good fight. Danny Henry. Let's look at his opponent. Just forgot. Danny Henry. I don't know anything about him really. It looks like this is going to be Henry's debut in the UFC. I don't think he's had another fight in the UFC. Oh no, he's had a couple. Okay. Took me a while to find his highlight. With Henry is an unknown. He beat Daniel Tamor for his debut in 2017. Won another fight by submission in 2018, but lost to Dan Ige in 2019. That's nothing to be ashamed of. Dan Ige is a up-and-coming talent in the featherweight division, so that's a tough outing for anybody. This should be an interesting fight. Amirkhani and Ige. Looking forward to it. So let's see. Next fight. I just realized there's a shitload of fights I have to go through. This should be the hard part, though, because I'm doing the tail of the tape for all the fights for this card. The other cards, I'm just going to talk about the results, because I saw all those fights. But, there we go. All right, next fight on the preliminary card for Fight Island. It will be welterweight, and it will be Alezu Zaleski dos Santos from Brazil, an upcoming Brazilian who's had a lot of wins lately. He will fight Muslim Salikov. That should be a good fight. That should be a pretty good fight. I think both of them have been pretty successful, especially Dos Santos at welterweight as of late. So whoever wins this is going to go up in the welterweight division for sure. Let's look at both fighters. Dos Santos has been in the UFC now for 5 years. Lost his debut by decision in 2015. 2016, he beat an impressive Russian, Omar Akhmedov, by KO. Then he beat Kita Nakamura by decision, so good year for him. Then he beat Lyman Good, who's another pretty damn good fighter, no pun intended. Then he beat Max Griffin. He's beaten some impressive welterweights already in 2017. Then he knocked out Sean Strickland. That's a hard fight too. He got 2 knockouts in 2018. This guy's on the rise. Then he beat Curtis Melinder in a co-main event of a card. Beat him by submission. And then in the co-main event in China, well, that's when he finally lost. He was on a hard win streak there, but he lost to Li Jinlong from China. That was a card that was built in China, so maybe it was purposely made that way for Li Jinlong. In a way to where it's a bad matchup. You know, styles make fights. And I don't know, maybe Dos Santos, and I'm just speculating here, I'm just a fan, but maybe Dos Santos just has some skills, or doesn't have some skills that Jinlong has and could have capitalized on. Because with those home shows, and that was the first ever UFC in China, that's where the promoters really want to have the home fighters, because there's a lot of Chinese fighters naturally in the first China card. Maybe they want to have them get fights that they could very well win, because it will look good to the audience to have the hometown kids win. So maybe it was just a bad matchup for him there. Since then, though, he's had another fight and he's won. He beat another tough Russian. He's beaten another tough Russian by decision. Now he's going to be given another Russian in Muslim Salikov. Those damn Russians. Imagine if he was in 155. He would be the answer to Khabib, maybe. But this should be a tough fight. Salikov is no joke. I've heard of him. Salikov, though, is 36, so that's going to be a problem. He's a stand-up fighter. Salikov is known as the King of Kung Fu. But in his debut, he knocked out a tough welterweight in Nordin Khalid. Then he won another decision. He was going to fight Nico Price, who's like a really high up-and-coming welterweight, but that didn't happen. So now he's going to fight Dos Santos. I don't know, man. This should be a good stand-up fight, it sounds like. Should be interesting. I'm going to go Dos Santos. Dos Santos, you know, he's just a little bit more in his prime, and he's just on a big roll right now. So this is a very important fight for Dos Santos. I feel like he has a little more to lose. Both have equally as much to lose. Salikov is too old to get a big loss like this, so yeah, it's going to be interesting. I just want to clarify too. I am first off, I'm not looking at the camera at all, which is pretty fun. But I am just a fan. I'm a fan of mixed martial arts. I'm not an expert by any means. I just want to clarify that. I'm just giving my opinion. I've never trained or anything before either. I think that's important to point out. Kind of like how Ariel Helwani or a number of other MMA journalists clearly seem to not train that much before. But anyway, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like it to me. But anyway, let's take a look here after that trash talking. But anyway, the main fight for the preliminary card will be actually a pretty interesting fight. It will be in light heavyweight, 205 pounds for the men. Well, there's no women 205 pounds. That'd be pretty impressive. There's like one 205-pound woman fighter, I think, in MMA. I think that's it. So it's not a very big weight class in terms of numbers for the women. But anyway, you got Volkan Ozdemir, a former title challenger from, I think he's from Switzerland. Yeah, from Switzerland. He will take on a newcomer called Jiri Porjatska. I'm probably pronouncing that totally wrong. Jiri is a newcomer, but he is well known. I think he's won titles outside of the UFC. He is 26-3. I'm looking forward to this. Volkan, though, he's a very proven light heavyweight, and he is also in his prime. He is only 30 years old. Jiri is 27. But just to look at Volkan's title reign, or his career in the UFC, he's only been in the UFC for 3 years, and he's already at the top of the division. But that's what happens when you knock people out quickly. He had 3 fights in 2017. That's really where he went on the rise. He got in the top of the division in the first year he was there. Like, impressive. It's crazy. He first came in, I think, short notice. He was replacing a fighter who was going to fight Ovince St. Prude. So he fought Ovince. I remember that fight. He did win that fight. He won by decision. And it was impressive. You know, and I was excited. There was a new fresh blood in the division for the light heavyweights. Next up, he fought already in a co-main event match for an event. He fought a guy named Misha Serkunov from, I don't know, somewhere in Eastern Europe. But a lot of Eastern Europeans I'm running into in this card. But and again, this is taking place in Fight Island, and I should have mentioned that earlier. A lot of the fighters, well, all of the events that have happened in the pandemic have happened in America, and none of the fighters that live outside of the United States, they couldn't come in. There was a travel ban to come in the United States, both from, I'm assuming, the U.S. and from almost every country from this lockdown. And so they couldn't come in and fight, so it was all Americans almost fighting in all of these pandemic cards. But with this fight taking place at Fight Island, this Fight Island, it's meant to be an arena, an area that's going to be used often, and it's so these international fighters that live outside the United States, they can have a chance to fight as well. They can have an area to have their fights happen throughout the year too. The UFC's been impressive with this whole thing. It's pretty cool. So, again, I'm impressed with this whole thing. But you got Volkan going against Misha Cirkunov. And he knocked him out that year. And then he knocked out Jimmy Manuwa that same year in 2017. And that was less than a minute. It was just, Misha one was less than a minute too. So no wonder why his next fight was for the light heavyweight title. Or no, it wasn't for the light heavyweight title. Looks like he was gonna have two fights in 2018, but they both got canceled. He did have one fight in 2018, and that was against Anthony Smith. Yeah. Oh no, wait a sec. God damn it. He did have another fight in 2018 before the two canceled fights. It was for the light heavyweight championship. He fought Daniel Cormier. Cormier, one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time. Cormier, to my understanding, he ragdolled him. He just took him to the ground and beat him by TKO. Cormier was clearly the superior wrestler, former Olympian. And he just threw Ozdemir down, I bet, and just beat him until he couldn't defend himself, really. So that was Ozdemir's chance for the light heavyweight championship, and he just wasn't ready for the wrestling. He couldn't get the job done, unfortunately. No shame in that. His opponent, Daniel Cormier, is one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time. So, I bet he learned a lot from that fight. So it was a hell of a contest. He then fought Anthony Smith later in the year, like 9 months later, and he lost that fight by submission. Anthony came back to fight for the light heavyweight title later the next year, so it is nothing to be ashamed of there either. But then he went Ozdemir and had an active 2019. He fought Dominic Reyes and lost by decision. Dominic also went on to fight for the light heavyweight title. Many people thought he won that fight against John Jones, but the judges didn't see it that way. He then fought Alir Latifi and knocked him out. So that was interesting. And then he fought Alexander Ratchik, who's a upcoming light heavyweight. And he was the first one to really dethrone Ratchik for a loss. And he won by decision. This is Ozdemir's first fight in 2020. So this will be interesting with this Parachko. He's kind of being thrown into the wolves pretty quick. I mean, Ozdemir is a tough customer. I think that's a fight I'm looking forward to. This main card though is insane for UFC 251. And we will get into that right now. Uh, First fight for the main card of UFC 251 on Fight Island on pay-per-view. It will be Amanda Ribas versus Paige Van Zant, which is a women's flyweight fight. Van Zant, who's well known for as one of the pretty faces in the UFC women's division in general. She is this is the last fight on her contract, so she says she's going to test the waters and see if other organizations will offer her more money after this fight to fight somewhere else, which is interesting. But for her last fight, she is not getting an easy send-off in this Ribas, who's as old as her. She's 26. So Ribas, she hasn't had a whole lot of fights in the UFC, but she has been a winner. Ribas has beaten everybody that she's fought in the UFC. She's pretty insane. She has beaten Emily Whitmire in the strawweight division. With Emily Whitmire is not an easy test. Then she beat Mackenzie Dern. She handed Mackenzie Dern, who's like a jiu-jitsu ultra black belt. She handed Mackenzie her first loss in MMA by decision. She beat a tough veteran in Randa Marcos by decision. Now she faces Paige. Boy, this is not easy. This is not an easy fight for Paige. Tough contest, really. I think Paige, she's been in the UFC since she was 20 years old. And she's been on and off, but Paige Van Zant came in young, and she could have been in MMA in the minor leagues for longer to develop, but that's just not how it went out for her. Some of the fighters in MMA, they go into MMA. It seems like, again, I'm not an expert. It seems like they go in when they're like too soon. Like they could develop themselves a little more. And you have Paige is a prime example of that. But given what she looks like, I mean, you could see why the UFC wanted to bring her in early. From a business standpoint, you can kind of see why. And yeah, it's interesting. Paige she won her debut fight at 20, or maybe even 19, but she won her debut fight by KO or TKO. Then she destroyed a veteran, Felice Herrig. I saw that fight. It was an annihilation. And then she won another fight. She destroyed Alex Chambers by submission. But then she lost to a former champion in Rose Namajunas. Maybe a year older than her, but they've nothing to be ashamed of. Rose is a top contender, a top fighter, and one of the best fighters women's fighters in MMA right now. So nothing to be ashamed of. But she beat Paige by submission in the 5th round. It took the 5th round, though. It was a competitive fight. And I thought it was a bloodbath, really, too. And then Paige fought Beck Rawlings. She won that by KO. I remember that, yeah. She definitely won by KO. Then she lost to Michelle Watterson. Michelle's a tough fighter, so that makes sense. It was the main event. So she was going to fight Jessica Ai, that got canceled. Then Paige had a rough loss in 2018. She lost to Jessica Rose Clark. but then Paige beat Rachel. I didn't know she beat Rachel. I thought she lost that fight in 2019, but she won by submission, and that was her last fight. So she is going to fight Amanda. I gotta tell you, man, I don't think she's gonna beat Amanda. I really don't. Amanda has beaten some impressive fighters. Uh, and I bet Amanda's pretty motivated to beat Paige. So, yeah, I think this will be a good fight. This is a under the radar type fight. So, even with how attractive Paige is, but this is still an under the radar fight. This could be very competitive. Hello, I am back again. Sorry, I had to go do something, but I am back. Let's just quickly get back to it and resume where I was at. For the next fight, we had Jessica Andrade facing Rose Namajunas for a highly contested fight in the women's strawweight division. That's at 115. These two have had a fight before, and it was for the strawweight championship. Rose was a champion at the time, was looking like a all-time great, like she was headed towards that direction. But Jessica had a different agenda on her mind. Rose was handling the fight with Jessica in their title match with strikes, by the sounds of it. But Jessica is notoriously strong, and she grabbed a hold of Rose and threw her on her head on the mat and knocked Rose out. It was nuts. But so Jessica won the title. She lost it in her next fight to Weili Zhang, who's the champion now, and had an epic fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. But that was that fight. This is this fight. So Jessica's been around for quite a while. She all the way back to where she fought Liz Carmouche, who fought Ronda Rousey in the first women's MMA fight, I believe, in the UFC. Maybe the second, because there might have been a fight under that in the card. But Liz, she lost to Liz, but then she won her next three fights in bantamweight, in 135, not 115. But then she lost her next 2 out of 3 fights against tough competition like Marion Renault, Raquel Pennington. Those two have just fought each other. Raquel won, but so then she went in strawweight and she destroyed Jessica Penne. It was ugly how she beat her. It was nasty. And right then and there, Joe Rogan says we have a contender. We have a contender in the strawweight division. So yeah, it's an interesting fight. Then she fought Joanne Calderwood, submitted her. I forgot about that fight. She then fought Angela Hill in a very entertaining fight, and that's where she fought Joanna for the strawweight title. And Joanna really seemed to expose her in terms of distance striking, because Jessica's still pretty short, it seems, for the division, and Joanna's clearly the better overall striker, it sounds like, and, in terms of skill, and Joanna took advantage of that along with her size and teed her off in the entire title fight, pretty much. But then she destroyed Joanna's rival, Claudia Gadelha, in a very impressive fight in Japan. And she's won 2 fights both of her fights in 2018. She beat Tisha. I didn't know they had a fight, but she beat Tisha. Apparently she knocked out Karolina Kovacevic in a very ugly way. I didn't see that fight, but it sounds like it was a very nasty fight to watch. Then she fought Rose, and that's where she won the title in 2019. But she lost it in her first title defense against Weili Zhang. Since then, she hasn't had a fight, so she's going to fight Rose again. Sounds like this could be a number one contender fight, because Rose Namajunas versus Weili Zhang could be interesting. Jessica and Weili Zhang, I mean, we saw what happened in that fight. It was a decisive knockout by Weili Zhang, but, Jessica could have a different game plan, and she could have a serious argument to fighting for the championship. Maybe not the most serious, if I had to be honest, but she does have an argument. But let's look at Rose and her rise in the UFC. Rose came in via The Ultimate Fighter, the reality TV show, but she lost in the finale tournament to Carla Esparza, who went on to become the first strawweight champion. But Rose is 28 years old right now. So at this time, she was only 22 when she fought Carla. So she's gotten infinitely better since then, to where she's one of the best female fighters in the world right now. She fought twice in 2015. She beat Angela Hill by submission. Then she beat Paige Van Zandt, the one I mentioned earlier, in a bloody fight. Paige Van Zandt was all bloody, but Rose won. And then you have Rose. She beat Tisha, which was an impressive win. Then she fought Carolina. That's where Carolina looked impressive. That was an era where she looked very impressive. And she beat Rose. Wasn't her time, but her time was 2017. That's when her time was. She beat Michelle Waterson by submission, and then she fought Joanna, who was the champion for quite a while at strawweight at this point, and she knocked her out in Madison Square Garden. And that's where Rose really became a name in the UFC. So that was a big deal. She really grew like a rose when you think about it. And then she beat Joanna again in a very, very close fight, in a very, very competitive fight. But I think Rose won in a 3 rounds to 2. She won in the final round, and it was a very impressive fight. Looks like they were supposed to fight again, but that fight got canceled, I guess. Then Rose lost in her next defense in 2019. She got knocked out by Jessica, and she hasn't fought since. It would make sense because that was a very brutal knockout when she lost to Jessica. So she's going to have a chance to redeem that fight again against Jessica. So this will be an interesting fight because it seemed like Rose was winning that fight until Jessica did what she did to Rose. So I'm going to pick Rose in this fight. I think she'll learn from that. She'll win. She'll be a very juicy type of contender to fight Weili Zhang next. That will be very interesting if that happens. Again, she has to go through Jessica. Finally, though, for this, we will go into the title fights. This will be very interesting. We will have Peter Yan go against Jose Aldo for the first title fight, and it will be for the men's bantamweight championship. Very interesting fight. Jose Aldo is a newcomer. This has been a long podcast. Jose Aldo has been doing this for a long time, and he is a former UFC champion for many years, former WEC champion before that for many years, and he's still not out of his prime. He's 33 years old, but he's just an older. He's had so many fights, so many high-profile fights at this point. But on the other hand, Peter Yan's a fresh hot newcomer, and he's 14-1. So This will be interesting. Jose was primarily in featherweight. He was the featherweight king for a long time. Well, let's just get into their history of fighting for the UFC. Peter Yan is a relative newcomer. He debuted in 2018. I wouldn't say that anymore. He's a title contender now, but he came in quickly to the rise of the UFC. He debuted, I believe, in Russia against Teruto Ishihara in bantamweight. He knocked Teruto out in that fight. And then he fought, this is where he fought in Russia. He fought Jin So-soon in Moscow, ended up beating him by decision. And then he fought Douglas Silva de Andrade. He knocked Douglas out. This was all in 2018, so Peter Yan was a hot, fresh new contender. And then Peter fought some serious competition at that point. He fought John Dodson. He ended up beating Dodson by decision. I thought they fought each other, and they did, so very impressive. Then he beat Jimmy Rivera in bantamweight. He beat him. This is where Peter Yan is for real to me. Jimmy Rivera is a top elite bantamweight, and he beat him by decision. And the next fight, he beat Uriah Faber. He just knocked him out silly. Uriah Faber is an ultimate legend, but he's just, I don't think he's in his prime. You know, he's like 38 years old. And that's old for a bantamweight. You have to be fast to be a bantamweight. So I'm sure Uriah is fast, but Peter's in his prime. No disrespect to Uriah, Peter's in his prime. So he destroyed Uriah, sounds like. So that's what earned Peter Yan the title, beating a legend like Uriah Faber, like that. He earned a fight against Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo, a guy who fought, I'm sure, Uriah Faber, and he's beaten everybody. I mean, he's fought in the UFC since 2011, since he was 24 years old. So he's been in the UFC forever. And he's a former WEC featherweight champion as well, which was a competitive promotion with the UFC until the UFC bought him. So he bought that organization. So he's been in he's been in this sport forever. Fought for the UFC for 9 years now. First two fights in 2011, he beat. I think he was already the champion at this point, or he was close to it. He beat Kenny Florian. He won 2 fights in 2011, including with Kenny Florian. 2012, he beat Chad Mendez by KO. I've seen that KO. That's a brutal knockout. Then he won 2 more fights after that. He beat Frankie Edgar, another legend in the sport. And he beat the Korean zombie Chan Sung Jung, who's fighting for the title, who's upcoming. He beat him by knockout. Then he fought in 2014, won 2 more fights. He's the champion at this point, clearly. He beat Ricardo Lamas by decision, then Chad Mendez by decision. Then that's where he met Conor McGregor. He's the biggest fighter in this sport, in combat sports right now. And this is what made Conor McGregor big. It was that 13-second knockout of Jose Aldo. Pretty unfair. That's what people know Jose Aldo for his fight with Conor McGregor. Never since then, it seems to be an uphill battle, in a way, for him. That's a bunch of crap. He fought in UFC. He fought again, I believe, for an interim title for the featherweight championship in UFC 200, because Conor decided to move up to lightweight at the time. So the featherweight division was in limbo. So him and Frankie Edgar fought again. He beat Frankie again. So Jose was the champion. But then he fought an upcoming contender named Max Holloway in 2017. He lost to Max both times. He lost the title to Max by KO in the third round. And again, he lost to Max again by KO in the next fight in the third round. So Max is going to go down as an all-time great as well. So there's nothing to be ashamed of. But Jose isn't the king like he used to be in the early 2010s. Earlier in his career. So he's had his ups and downs, and they're big ups and big downs in the UFC. Nothing to be ashamed of. He had one fight in 2018 though, and he bounced back. He knocked out Jeremy Stevens, who's another legend in the featherweight division, but he beat him. And then you got 2019, where so-so year for him. Jose Aldo, he beat Renato Moicano. He knocked him out as well. But then he fought Alexander Volkanovski in 2019 and lost by decision. Volkanovski is fighting in the next fight on this card for the featherweight championship as the champion. So you kind of see how good Volkanovski is. I mean, he's a champion. So it's an interesting contest. Then he fought Marlon Moraes. This was Jose's first fight as a bantamweight, as a 135-pound fighter instead of 145. And people thought Jose beat Marlon, who's a top bantamweight, but the judges had Marlon win, and a lot of people didn't agree with that. I didn't see the fight, so that's where I see it. But I don't know what happened with Marlon. I guess he lost or something, but he's not in the picture right now for the championship. And he is Jose is in the title picture because the UFC clearly thinks Jose won. So I don't know what happened with that fight, but it was interesting. But it doesn't matter. Jose gets a shot against Peter Yan, and this is an interesting freaking fight. I really am curious to see how this goes down. I wonder how many fighters. I wonder if Jose has an advantage on the ground, because it seems like Peter Yan is an elite level boxer. So you got to figure Jose will take it to the ground, or this will be a ground fight. It will be interesting to watch. Whoever wins this will be the 135-pound champion, given that Henry Cejudo has retired from the UFC after his last fight in May. He's not retiring. He's trying to get more money. That's what's happening there. But this will be interesting. Jose Aldo against Peter Yan. Let's do it. Let's do it. I will pick Jose. I think Jose will find a way to win. I think Peter Yan is just too inexperienced, and Jose's still a little bit too much in his prime. I think Jose will find a way to win this fight. I really do. And, he'll become a two-division champion by winning this fight. And he'll be even stamped more as an all-time great. He already is an all-time great. That's my opinion. Him losing to Conor McGregor in one fight, I just don't think that's fair. What his dominance in the early 2000s is undeniable. He was just beating everybody. And hopefully if he wins this fight against Peter Yan, then finally Jose will get the McGregor loss off his back in my mind. That will be finally where that giant, big landmark UFC loss people will finally forget about it, because he was able to win a title afterwards. And people will forget about it. It's been long enough. It's been almost 5 years. So I think people will finally not think of Jose as that as much anymore, because Jose proved that just how great he is. So that's what I think will happen, but we'll see. We'll find out. Next fight, the second out of 3 title fights, will be, let's see, it will be oh, sorry, I'm having a brain fart. Be Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway. This fight will be interesting. This will be an epic featherweight title fight between 2 awesome fighters that are in their prime. They've had a fight not too long ago for the featherweight title. Volkanovski ended up winning. I didn't see the fight either. It's unfortunately a common trend. But man, hey, what can I say? It's hard to watch all these fights. But Alexander is a tough customer. He has some serious knockout power for the featherweight division, and he's a beast. And it sounds like Max didn't have an answer for that power. But man, this Alexander Volkanovski is a tough guy to deal with. And I think I don't think it'll be any different right off the bat, to be honest, considering what we've heard about with the lack of training that Max seems to have for this fight. And sometimes that's good, to have a lack of training, lack of sparring. It's good for the head to heal and stuff. And I'm not saying he got heavily damaged by Alexander, but that's just what I've seen with other fighters from hearing them in interviews. They feel more fresh in terms of their brain, in terms of everything, because they don't spar much in practice like they used to. And that they end up getting positive results in the octagon because of that in later fights. So we'll see how it goes. Alexander, it sounds like he did have a training camp for this fight, a regular training camp, as regular as you can get during the pandemic. And he fought, let's look at his tail of his tape, see where he's gone. Because he kind of came out of nowhere for me. Not out of nowhere, but I didn't really pay much attention to him. He debuted in 2016 and knocked out his he knocked out Yusuke Kasuya in his debut. I don't know who that is, but yeah, that was his first win. Then he came in 2017, had 2 more fights, won both by decision, so he went up the ranks in 2017. 2018, it seems like it got more serious. He beat Jeremy Kennedy by KO. I think he handed Kennedy his only loss. Beat Darren Elkins, who's a tough guy, by decision. Then he knocked out, and I believe retired, Chad Mendes. Chad Mendes hasn't fought since. So he knocked out Chad in that fight. 2019, He beat Jose Aldo, the guy in the previous fight, by decision. He's a tough guy. Tough guy, this Volkanovski is. And then he beat Max Holloway in what was believed to be a competitive fight, but it sounds like Alexander just beat him by rounds, barely. And now they're going to fight again. Because Max has done a lot in this featherweight division to where he kind of deserves a rematch. He really is an impressive guy. That's where I get it. Well, that's how I view Max. So yeah, that's how I see it. That is the rise, though, of Alexander. Very tough guy, but even older than his opponent, who's been in the game a lot longer, in the UFC a lot longer, at least than Alexander. 4 years longer. Max has been in the UFC since he was 20 to 21 years old, or 19 to 20 years old. Like, he's really grown in the UFC. Max started off by winning his first 3 fights in the UFC. Or no, he lost his debut fight against Dustin Poirier, who ended up being a top fighter in the UFC as well. I'm going to talk about him later. Then he fought, lost by decision in the first round, but then he won his next 3 fights in 2012. 2013, he lost his next 2 fights to Dennis Bermudez and Conor McGregor. Just a guy named Conor McGregor. No shame in those losses. Then he then in 2014, that's where he really went on his run, or that's where he started. He won one fight by KO, next by submission, another by KO, and then another by KO. The guy is impressive. 2015, that's where people really started to take notice. He beat Cole Miller by decision. He's a well-known veteran. Beat Cub Swanson by submission. Another well-known fighter. He just beat well-known guys at this point. He beat Charles Oliveira by KO, Jeremy Stevens by decision, Ricardo Lamas by decision, Anthony Pettis he knocked out. That's where he won the interim featherweight championship in Toronto. So Max arrived at this point. He was a well-known guy. 2017, that's where he beat Jose Aldo for the featherweight championship. He beat him twice for the featherweight title in 2018 or 2017, and man, he's impressive. Max Holloway is impressive, and that's where Joe said in the second fight, or no, the next fight with Brian Ortega, that he is the best featherweight fighter ever that we've ever seen. But then 2019 happened after he beat Brian Ortega for his defense in 2018. He lost to Dustin Poirier by decision for the interim lightweight title. Max was able to move up. And then Max beat Frankie Edgar by decision. After that, defending the title in 2019, that's where he lost to Volkanovski late in 2019. It's a tough fight. It was a tough fight for Max. And I think it's going to be the same outcome. I don't think he's going to be able to beat Alexander with the lack of training. That's just my gut guess. I could be wrong. I mean, Max has taken a lot of damage in the last year with Poirier, and Frankie, I'm sure, didn't help. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I think Max is he's still very young. He's in his prime, so it will be interesting to see Max and Alexander get at it. I think this would be a great fight. Great. It should be a main event fight, really. But they're really trying to stack this card up, and they're trying to really move this card into where it's impressive. Finally, you got the main event fight of this card. That will be the main event. That will be Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal. And this will be a very good fight. I think Kamaru Usman is a tough customer. Maybe one of the best welterweight fighters we've ever seen, no doubt. And he's going to face Jorge. This is crazy. This is a short notice fight. And Jorge is going to. Jorge was not scheduled to fight Kamaru as of a few days ago. It was supposed to be Gilbert Burns. But the UFC, Gilbert Burns, I should say, he tested positive for COVID in the process of going to where are they fighting at? Wherever Fight Island's at. They ended up fighting there. He ended up getting COVID, so he couldn't fight. Jorge, they called Jorge up, and they said, "Hey, can you fight?" And it looks like Jorge agreed. Originally, it was supposed to be Jorge versus Kamaru, but the UFC and Jorge had contractual issues. Jorge, it sounded like he wanted more money because he is becoming a well-known name in the UFC, one of the more household names. So he ended up, the UFC said, "No, we're not giving you more money. We're going to go with this contender a little bit below you, and Gilbert Burns, because of that." And so that's just how it went. And there we go. But that, it worked out in Jorge's favor, hilariously, by Gilbert getting COVID-19, and Jorge, I think, got more money because of it. It's like, well, it's going to cost you to get me back, because they didn't need to do that. They could have main evented Holloway and Volkanovski, but this is Fight Island. This is the first ever Fight Island. So they really wanted to pack this card, so they gave the BMF champion a call, the baddest mother effer champion a call, and yes, he has that belt. I'll get into that right now. As I talk about the tale of the tape between these two and the rise of their careers. Jorge has been fighting forever. He's been fighting since backyard brawls were a thing. Kimbo Slice. He was in those videos with Kimbo Slice. But he rose through the ranks in MMA and went into UFC in 2013. I think he fought in WEC as well. But he debuted for the UFC in 2013. Or no, he fought for Strikeforce. That's what it was. Fought for Strikeforce, then went to the UFC. Went into lightweight and ended up getting 2 wins in a row, beating Tim Means and Michael Chiesa. Two hard fights. But then he lost to Rustam Khabilov by decision in 2013. 2014, he beat Pat Healy by decision. Beat Darren Cruikshank by decision. Beat James Krause by decision. So won 3 in a row. He knocked out Cesar Ferreira at welterweight. Oh no, where's Ally Quinta? No, I didn't find out. Oh, there you go. He lost to Ally Quinta at lightweight. That's where he moved to welterweight. So he knocked out Cesar Ferreira. Ended up not fighting until November after that in 2015, where he lost to Benson Henderson, a former lightweight champion. After that, he fought. Who did he fight after that? Let's see. He fought in 2016, lost to Lorenz Larkin by decision, but then he beat Ross Pearson by decision in 2016. Then he knocked out Jake Ellenberger, technical knockout, but he was well on his way to knocking him out by decision. 2017, his name really got on the market when he knocked out Donald Cerrone in 2017. Nasty knockout too. He fought Damian Maia in a hard-fought ground battle. Damian Maia was a submission expert at that time, and he had the most trouble, I think, in his career in trying to submit Jorge. Jorge is very good on the ground, and Damian couldn't really get the job done. He only won by points in that fight. But then he lost in a striking battle to Stephen Thompson in Madison Square Garden a few months later. So kind of a rough year for Jorge. Jorge took the year off in 2018, and then that was the 2019 became the year of Jorge Masvidal. He fought everything went his way that year, and he became a star in the UFC. He really became a top star. The Cuban from Miami that is a bad dude to deal with, kind of like Scarface. That was his reputation. And he beat Darren Till by knockout in March of that year. Then he proceeded to knock out Ben Askren, a hot newcomer in the welterweight division, and beat him in 5 seconds. The fastest knockout in UFC history. It was insane. It was insane. Ben Askren trash talked him. Jorge did not like him, and then Ben Askren ended up eating all of his words. And Jorge beat him in 5 seconds. It was nuts. So that's when Jorge got the big call out from one of the superstars in the UFC, from Nate Diaz from Stockton, California. And it was in Madison Square Garden. It was going to be for the BMF Championship, the baddest mother effing champion. It's a belt that the UFC created just from this fight. So it was a cool fight between two gangsters, if you will, West Coast versus East Coast, and it was a big deal. It was treated like a big money fight, and Jorge ended up smoking. Really, just it was more of a disqualification of how Jorge won, or like a stoppage. It was a stoppage, but Jorge really took it to Nate Diaz in that fight. He really beat him very well. And Jorge's been a star ever since. And this is the big fight. Jorge is now going to fight the champion, Kamaru Usman. Kamaru is a tough fighter. And this is going to be a great fight because Kamaru, he has been doing nothing but winning since he got in the UFC. In the co-main event, Kamaru Usman beat Haider Hassan by submission in the second round to win the Ultimate Fighter. And then he beat Leon Edwards by decision. I didn't know that. I didn't know they fought. But he beat Leon Edwards by decision. to win that fight. After that, Kamaru won 2 more fights in 2016, beat Alexander Yakovlev and Warley Alvarez. That was a dominant win against Warley. I remember that fight. That was brutal for Warley. Kamaru smoked him. After that, in 2017, that's where Kamaru really became an issue for the welterweight division. He beat Sean Strickland by decision, another wrestling match. Very impressive win. And after that, he knocked out Sergio Moraes, his first knockout in the UFC. Very impressive win by Kamaru. That's where Kamaru really went up the ranks. After that, he beat Emil Meek in a risky fight, but he ended up beating him by decision. After that, Kamaru was given his big high-profile fight in Damian Maia. Kamaru broke his arm in that fight, and Damian Maia still couldn't take him down. Kamaru shut him down pretty much in that whole fight. He outstruck him. Got an impressive win there in that fight. After that, he fought Rafael dos Anjos, a former lightweight champion. Apparently, he just dominated Rafael. Rafael didn't really stand a chance. 2019 was the big payoff year. He fought Tyron Woodley, the UFC welterweight champion, just completely destroyed Tyron Woodley. Just completely dominated him from pillar to post in that fight. It was very impressive. So, very impressive win by Kamaru Usman. And from that fight, Kamaru Usman was from then on the UFC champion of the welterweight division. And very impressive. Very impressive. I didn't think Kamaru would beat Tyron that bad. That was scary how bad he beat Tyron in that fight. I never thought I'd see that. But there we go. And then Kamaru got his big high-profile fight against Colby Covington. That was a very heated rivalry between Kamaru and Colby. Both were so dominant in the division, and they were trash-talking each other to the max up to that fight. Colby is notorious for that kind of stuff. He really has alienated himself in the MMA community because of it. But Kamaru ended up looking very impressive, apparently, in that fight, and he TKO'd Colby Covington to retain the championship. So, very impressive. Colby complained at the stoppage, but apparently Kamaru still looked very dominant in the fight. Or very impressive, at least, in the fight, to where Kamaru is still the champion. Now Kamaru and Jorge have been trash-talking each other in February. And it's very interesting to see these two, what will happen here. Because if anybody can capitalize off a short notice fight, Jorge to me is one of those guys. And it'll be interesting to see what will happen. What will happen over time. Or very quickly in this fight. Because Jorge's clearly good on the ground. Kamaru's not going to be able to wrestle Jorge all day on the ground. Jorge's good on the ground. That's not going to be an answer. And Kamaru is very powerful at striking. I think he's probably more powerful than Jorge. Because Jorge was a 155-pounder before going to welterweight. And Kamaru's big for welterweight. So Kamaru has the power advantage, but Jorge might have the skill advantage. And it's going to be a very interesting fight. Very interesting fight. I'm looking forward to it. This will be a fun fight to watch. If I had to pick, my brain is saying Kamaru. My heart is saying Jorge. I'm going to go with Jorge. I think this will be one of those fights where It'll be an epic UFC moment, and Jorge's going to win. He's going to be a next big megastar in the UFC. I really do. He's already a big star now, but he will be an even bigger star once he holds both the BMF and the UFC championship, both together. That will be crazy. But yeah, that's how I'm going to see it. That's what I see with the fight, and that's what I see with that card, with how that card is going to be for this event. It's going to be a fun event. I'm thinking about ordering it. I know that will cost me some money, some cheddar, but I'm thinking about it. I don't know though. Like I don't have a job right now. I'm in a pandemic, so I work at a nursing home, but I can't work at it because of family here. So it's it's not like I have money to spend. So I'm thinking about spending it though anyway, because this is an awesome card, and I really want to watch it and see what happens. This will be interesting. Interesting, because I don't think this short notice thing is going to affect Jorge like people think. I really don't. And I think Kamaru was expecting to fight Gilbert Burns, not Jorge Masvidal. And Jorge is a different fighter compared to Gilbert. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it big time. Looking forward to it big time. Man, what a show. I was going to talk about the other two, the past two UFC fight nights as well, but I think I'm going to hold that off because this has already been a pretty long show. Yeah, it's almost 2 hours long, so I think this will just do it for tonight. But that's okay. I have content for tomorrow. That's good, and we'll go off there. So I'm looking forward to it big time. Looking forward to talk about more UFC, because the UFC's done a good job. They really have capitalized in this pandemic period when no other sport has, except for WWE. But at least even the UFC has done it infinitely better than WWE or All Elite Wrestling for that matter as well, because unlike those two, UFC is being ethical in every way for this during this pandemic. WWE hasn't had a COVID test until this past week when they got publicly criticized for it, and rightfully so. They shouldn't have a show, and I don't plan on watching their crap for a while. But in All Elite Wrestling, they never stopped their shows either during a pandemic. And granted, they've had tests, but it hasn't been as impressive to me as the UFC. So and they don't wear masks. The wrestlers there that watch the matches from the side of the audience, they don't wear masks around each other or anything. It's not very ethical. It's not as ethical maybe as it can be over there in my eyes, at least in my eyes. I don't know if that's for certain, but it certainly doesn't look like that to me. UFC though, 100% looks like that. It's not even a debate in terms of that. But that will be my show, guys. I hope you all liked it. Please like and subscribe. And man, thank you for listening to the show. I'm looking forward to doing more stuff on here. I'm more free, so hopefully I'll be able to get into it tomorrow again. But until then, I'll catch you on the flip side, and enjoy your night. Enjoy UFC 251 Fight Island as well. Go watch it. It's good stuff. If not on pay-per-view, at least the fights on ESPN. They're all good. But get it on pay-per-view too. Catch you guys later. Until then, see you soon.